Calavares County, and welcome to another edition of Mondo Calavares. I'm your host, Mike Taylor. Now this time I'm going to suggest that we put on our thinking caps and get ready to absorb some really interesting information, because my guest this time has something fascinating to show us. And, well, Vance Turner, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
You bet. Now, Vance, what have you come up with? This is just fascinating.
Well, we started with a little project. Somebody had given me a problem where they were trying to build a mobile water purification unit, and they wanted to use solar panels to basically drive this. Mm-hmm. And the problem was that the pump that was in this water purification unit was using up more energy.
Way too much power.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was what created the real problem for all of these people that want to do these portable solutions, is the size of the solar field that would actually have to drive them.
Sure.
And I was out in my vineyard, and I was putting new trellising in, and when you put trellising in, you put the iron post and you got the steel wire behind it. Mm-hmm. And being the electrical engineer that I am, I remembered back in the old days that most people think that the telegraph was powered by a battery. But what they really don't realize is that it was an iron post on one end of the wire and a copper on the other end, and it used what was called Telluric Current of the earth to actually power it. And not that a lot of people know about this, but even pipelines use this to drive some of the sensors that are on their pipelines.
Oh, wow. Okay.
To be able to power their small systems that they have out there. Mm-hmm. It's not voltage. It's very low voltage, 1 to 2 volts, but it's a lot. It can be a lot of current. In fact, it can be so much current it can kill you.
Oh man.
So I said, I could use this to electrolyze water into hydrogen, oxygen gas, and I wonder if I could build a pump around that. Mm-hmm. And there was a guy back in the 1800s called Humphreys back in in Australia, who had built a Humphreys pump that was based on wood gas. And I said, well, I don't have to open it up to the atmosphere. I can basically keep it closed in a closed cycle. Yeah. And I could actually use these gases to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. And the shock wave and all the other things that come along with that. And a lot of people told me that I was completely nuts. But
the new idea is always going to generate some of that response, isn't it?
Yeah. Especially a reputable person that is supposed to have gone to school and knows what he's talking about.
So you've basically kind of reinvented a pump.
Well, it's going to be more than that, because it actually makes us rethink how we do energy altogether. Oh. Because nobody really thought that a pump could actually change the world. Mm-hmm. But when you think about what we were doing, this sets a universal standard for chemical energy to pressure. Oh, okay. And pressure is what's used to be able to do work. Mm-hmm. So whether you're moving water, whether you're driving a turbine, whether you're going to do hydraulics, and a lot of people want to go to water hydraulics, this pump will be at the center of being able to do that efficiently.
Okay. Can you give those of us who didn't get a degree with a bunch of letters after it, can you kind of explain how this works?
Well, it's basically the same as any traditional combustion chamber motor. Mm-hmm. Like in your car engine. Sure. You basically put oxygen and fuel in there, mm-hmm. and sometimes you have to compress it. Yep. They do that for a reason. And you explode that, and mm-hmm. it gives you work. Okay? We don't have a compression cycle. Okay. So what we are doing is that we are introducing into a pipeline combustion chamber that basically we take hydrogen oxygen gas that we've electrolyzed and inject that into the combustion chamber, and we explode that, and that creates a hypersonic shock wave, nearly Mach 4.5, which is the fastest chemical reaction on the planet or in the universe. And we use that to actually push against water, which is non-compressible, and it acts as a piston, and it expels the water out of the combustion chamber.
Oh, wow.
Once it's done that, it creates a vacuum. And from the graph here, you can see that we end up with a vacuum down near about 2.5 psi absolute every time that we operate this pump. So where most combustion engines, you get pressure, you don't get vacuum on that backside. What we end up is that we can do work that other things can't do because we get the pressure on one side and then we get the immediate vacuum coming after that.
It sounds very efficient too.
It is efficient, and when people start to really model this, and I get the resources to show how efficient that this is, we're going to find out that it's probably one of the highest efficiencies that you can reach.
Wow.
And I won't even go into that number because I know it's in the 90s.
Wow.
And I don't know of another process out there that will be able to even get close to this in efficiency.
Where are you kind of in the Inventor Practical? Here's the pump.
We have a second prototype that's built.
Wow.
And I hope you guys come up and we can get some film of you guys seeing the pump in operation.
Oh, yeah.
We're doing single shots right now because the gas delivery that's on there is set for applying only enough gas per cycle or per charge to equal 1 psi. So when we want to build up to 50 psi, we have to operate it 50 times, which takes about a minute or so to count everything up, so that we can actually start producing the data sets of a graph of this much gas produces this much pressure, followed by this much vacuum. Nobody's ever done that. Nobody ever produced any of those graphs. So we'll be able to have a data set that we can work with to be able to size our pumps later on down the line based on these initial single cell experiments that we're working on right now.
How big is this?
It's 40 liters.
1 psi.
It's about 2 feet tall, about 12 inches on a diameter, holds about 40 liters, and is engineered to 10,000 psi. Wow. And we can operate it up to 1,500 because our level sensor and our pressure sensor are limited to 1,500 psi. And right now, because of the velocity that we generate on the water, I'm afraid to take it over 50 psi. Because, well, most people, 50 psi is a lot of pressure. But we generate at Mach 4.5, it generates a lot of velocity.
I bet.
So sizing things start to be completely different when you start looking at the amount of pressure we can actually push and the volumes that are entailed. So most of the fire engines around here, those guys are operating at pressures that take 2 or 3 men to be able to hold those hoses, and you don't want to let one go.
Yeah.
And the same thing is in effect here.
Okay. And you talk about an explosion. Is that what kind of gets the pump going? Where is that combustion taking place?
Well, the pump is oriented so that the water is basically below it.
Okay.
It gets pulled in. So this pump is self-priming. So if we had a dry system, we would basically just put the gas in there. We'd do the explosion. It would drive the air out. That vacuum would sit here and pull the water into it and basically fill it. So the more we operate it, the more it purges the air out of the system.
Sure.
So it's a self-priming pump, and we just do it that way.
What are some of the, I guess I'll say, quickest practical applications for this?
Well, the thing that's really interesting about it is that because we get down to the 2.5 psi, and that we do have a hypersonic shock wave, I know that right now, because the 2 psi that we're working with is based on the vapor pressure of water, that's our steady state that we can reach. And if we use Bernoulli correctly, we can use that shock wave to actually drive the vacuum even lower. So even at the 2.5 psi we're at, we can boil water at between 140 Fahrenheit and 122.
Really?
So, yes. Wow. So that means that we could use solar panels to basically purify water. If we were to use this pump down at the sanitation district, we could basically boil off the water from the sewage and basically freeze dry the sewage in the plant.
Oh, wow.
So we will be able to do water clarification at rates and energies that no one else can really reach without a lot of expense.
Wow. And all from an idea that came to you in your vineyards.
All that came from a little project in the vineyards. And the thing that's what we are trying to do right now, we're going to try to get a storage container down at the wellhead, and we're going to use that drawing right there. We're going to put the pump on the wellhead, but in the storage container we'll have all the plumbing that's in there, and we're going to use that to actually drive the well pump. And then we're going to replace all the trellising in the vineyard. And what I look forward to is the day where I don't use the utility to be able to run the electrolyzer and just leave the vineyard itself driving the pump and producing the current that's necessary to operate this device.
And how big a solar panel would you need for that? Or once this starts, does it kind of almost become a little bit self-perpetuating?
Well, just from this graph right here, what that represents is that we could operate a pump on basically 2 liters of hydrogen gas, and we could move 6,226 gallons of water in an hour.
Wow.
And but we know that we can this pump will actually move more of that depending on the pressures that we want to do. And we're talking about being able to move water at rates that are not heard of on the planet right now.
Wow. And so where do you see this going? Well, I guess, actually, how far along this are you? How close are you to producing, here's the pump kind of thing?
We have the pump. We have the pump. The problem now is having the funding and the resources available to us to basically put it in process.
Oh, okay.
We are working to be able to take our prototype now and find venues to be able to put it in process to demonstrate its operation. There are some things that we're trying to work with on the gas delivery so that we can speed things up, but we need mass flow controllers instead of the model that we have right now for gas delivery that uses a couple of accumulators.
When you say gas, what are we using?
Hydrogen. We have hydrogen and oxygen gas.
Okay.
So we use those, we mix those in the 2-to-1 relationship, which is really interesting because if you burn hydrogen with other stuff, like hydrogen and air, it's not that efficient. What you really want is, and when you look at the shock wave and you look at the pressures that are attained, that 2-to-1 relationship of taking water back in, or hydrogen, oxygen, gas back into water is the best way to be able to get the forces that we're looking for.
And it sounds incredibly clean, too.
We got a closed pipeline.
Yeah, so you're not really expelling anything.
We're not.
You're just moving the water.
That's right.
Now, can this be done to move something else? I mean, could you pump oil with this pump?
Well, you don't want to do things where you're moving. I look at it more like you can move water.
Okay.
Could I sit here and do things like, we were talking to some folks that were running plants that are down in Nevada that contain pools of acids and things like that.
Oh, man.
And their pumps don't last longer than about 30 days. So the answer is that we could actually produce these pumps in ceramics and actually move caustic chemicals that normal pumps can't move at much more efficiencies. And, other than we would have to rethink how we do ignition so that we don't have any metal as the igniter?
Yeah, that's where I guess my brain is getting a little hung up on the fact that we have this closed system. So it's kind of whatever you're moving has to be your sort of catalyst, right?
Yes, and when we first we had an igniter that we had a problem with, and we had to go down to the local AutoZone and get a new spark plug, and the only spark plug that would replace that igniter was the original spark plug from a Model T.
Oh my gosh!
So we're using. I find that kind of historically interesting.
Yeah, there's some kind of irony there.
There is, but working through these problems of ignition. These are the early days.
Sure.
We're talking about a Model T pump for a new generation that's coming forward.
Yeah.
And who knows how far this thing can go.
Before we started the show, you were talking about rocket engines too. How does this play into that?
Well, if you go on the University of Cincinnati's DET Lab has a video of some of the new rocket motors that they're working on where they're doing what's called pulse detonation. And that pulse detonation is identical to what we're doing. Our pulse detonation is actually moving water, but they're using the pulse detonation to actually move rockets.
Wow.
Now, they don't actually add water to their pulse detonation. And I'm going to give them a clue is that if you were to add the water to the pulse detonation, you actually get that superheated steam component.
Oh, wow.
And you'll actually get more coming out of that pulse detonation.
Kind of a bigger, better rocket.
Yeah.
So University of Cincinnati needs to give you a call.
Well,
or have you called them?
we're trying to work with them because there are